Today we're going to react to a video by Chris of Plant Chompers in which he narrates a not at all biased piece on how we can feed our growing population.
A group of really great scientists created a film to kick off the 5th annual Global Food Security Conference happening in Belgium this week. These scientists are way above my pay grade when it comes to knowing how to raise food sustainably to feed 10 billion people despite disruption from war and climate change and without turning our food into frankenfood.
This is really rich considering he mentions some toxic wheat and cultivated meat later in the same video.
I have a strong background in earth science, but nowhere near their expertise in food production. However, I did make an important episode on the unbelievable story of how we figured out how to feed the masses by breeding huge wheat berries on dwarf stalks that were strong enough to support such large kernels. Not only did Norman Borlaug get a Nobel Prize for that and the highest honor many nations can bestow a foreign scientist, but there is a statue of him in the rotunda of the Capitol.
I understand that finding a way to feed people in impoverished areas of the world is incredibly important, and an accomplishment such as this did help save lives. However, we should not forget that there are certain foods that are generally toxic to the human body and that are not so great for the earth either. If we want to feed humans well, as we work towards more permanent solutions to make this possible, we should prioritize food quality and human health. Considering the state of the world now, I understand that there will be exceptions to this as we try to find the best answer. Not everyone will be able to take full advantage of or will have the privilege of access to proper human nutrition. It must be stated that wheat is not human food, and it shouldn't continue to be considered as such. If we want to make sure that people have proper nutrition, there is better, or I should say, actual food we should try to provide to people. Food that isn't likely to poison their system as they consume it. Food that provides a more complete nutritional profile. Because nutrition is important, isn't it?
Unfortunately, some people do have digestive issues with Norman's wheat, which they didn't have before with heritage wheats. I also made episodes on how modern breeding has turned beef into a frankenfood.
Oh, hello, Irrational Bias. Pleasure meeting you here. Why are we randomly negging cows? Okay, let me be charitable. I think I understand what Chris is trying to do. Some people may argue, as I just did, that wheat is toxic and that specific wheat in particular harmed people. Perhaps he wants to point out that the animals we rely on to feed lots of people today, especially in the first world, have also been modified and therefore also carry risks upon consumption. I don't disagree with them. I think all of our food is crap. The difference is one of these things is inherently toxic and the other is only toxic because of things that humans have done. Both plant and animal matter are susceptible to environmental problems. So both are bred, modified, and treated to be able to withstand such influences. Both are also tampered with in order for them to yield more edible matter. But what exactly is the inherently toxic part of a ruminant animal that humans eat? If I were to find a natural source of wheat and I could manage to process it to make it edible for myself, I would wind up with issues that I've come to recognize as allergic reactions to matter that does not belong in the human digestive system. Issues we have normalized over time because we keep convincing ourselves that things that aren't food are actual food. Things the severe symptoms of which can lead to debilitating impacts to human life. Things we've learned to accept the abuse of to the point where we consider the people whose bodies let them know they messed up by consuming the non-food diseased. We basically invent diseases and look at people as though there's something wrong with them. On the other hand, if I were in a place where I could hunt and kill animals, what would be the inherently toxic thing? What I would expect to be the cause of symptoms and what those symptoms would be. Humans who existed in the past spent a lot of time cultivating and domesticating plants in order to make them edible even at all, or safe to eat in another way. But when it comes to animals, they were perfectly edible, but we just wanted more meat or more fat, or we wanted them to be stronger. So if this is what Chris is getting at, I would still have to disagree, but let's keep watching.
Humans have never been exposed to, which is becoming more and more strongly associated with diabetes.
I don't think it's any kind of secret that it's blood sugar issues that tend to lead to pathologies such as diabetes. If one were to stop poisoning themselves with carbohydrates on a regular basis, and they focus their diet around the two essential macronutrients, fat and protein, the odds that they would wind up with blood sugar issues, their bodies being forced to deal with insulin responses due to the poisoning, are quite slim. You don't need to wait around for an association or some opinion paper to prove this. You could try to feed yourself properly, with fat and protein, and buy a blood glucose meter and test it yourself. What is your blood sugar response while eating the way you eat now, assuming fat and protein from animal sources are not the staple of your diet? And note how the response changes as you slowly adapt to such a diet, one with fat and protein, over time.
So I salute these people who have the enormous mission of feeding 10 billion people without wrecking the planet or making us sick.
If they're suggesting that we get our nutrition from plants mostly, sickness would virtually be guaranteed.
Every one of us depends on them, so thank goodness they're so qualified and they care. Here's their film. They wrote the script, and I had the easiest job of all. Just flap my lips.
I myself wouldn't find it easy to narrate such an obvious propaganda piece, but I guess we can't all have dignity.
By the year 2050, the world population will likely be close to 10 billion people. At the same time, climate change and other crises threaten food production. Will we be able to feed nearly 10 billion people under these conditions? And what will our food look like? First, let's have a look at how we currently use the Earth's surface.
I will summarize on the screen how the math breaks down according to the video. It's well done, just lengthy. The Earth is 30% land and 70% water. Of the land, 10% is glaciers, 19% is barren, 71% is habitable. Of the habitable land, 1% is built-up land, 11% is shrubs, 37% is forest, and 51% is for agriculture. Of the land used for agriculture, 2/3 is used for grazing and 1/3 is used for crops.
We currently use this land to feed 8 billion people. To feed 10 billion in a similar way, we would need to produce 25% more calories. But diets are expected to change with economic development, which would make the amount of produced calories even higher.
This was the second point in the video that raised a red flag for me. All too often in this conversation, people who want the world to be more plant-based will mention calories. I've gotten to the point where I don't even consider calories a thing anymore because I'm still trying to figure out how they help anybody at all. What we should be focused on is nutrition and the quality of the nutrients we are seeking to provide to people. When we only focus on things like calories, that's how we wind up making an even more toxic form of wheat just to keep people alive, as opposed to keeping them alive and well. Obviously, it's best to be alive if we're talking about well-being, but we're looking for a permanent solution, and in that case, simple survival is not good enough. Simply providing people with quote-unquote energy while labeling them diseased for having the diseases that are only caused by people continuing to convince other people to poison themselves with plant matter, which also includes mental health issues, is not good enough. The other important part to well-being is well. You may be wondering where I get off saying that plants make people mentally unstable. I issued a challenge earlier, and a similar result should become apparent in a very short period of time. Not only should you see better blood sugar regulation over time, you should also notice a marked difference in your mental health. This is not something science can tell you is going to happen to you, by the way. No scientific research can ever give you that information. It is something that you can prove to yourself or demonstrate to yourself. When it comes to nutrition science, this is really the only way a person can know what the outcome is going to be for themselves. If you're worried about all the things we've been warned about when it comes to the consumption of animal products, red meat, saturated fat, dietary cholesterol, heme iron, there are two things I'd like you to keep in mind. Causation has never been proved for any of these things being detrimental to humans. The associative data that we have is incredibly muddied and unreliable, but there's a key takeaway. A vegan diet is one that excludes animal products completely. A carnivore diet gets pretty close to the exclusion of all plants, but there's flexibility there because it's not based on an ideology. The consumption of honey, coffee, and fruit are often noted, but if we focus on the extreme, those things would be limited. If it turns out that eating a mixed diet is the problem, which both of these quote-unquote extremes inherently indicate, then it stands to reason that it's a combination of macronutrients that's the problem. Indeed, if you want to take the associative data as gospel, it's important to ask yourself if they based it on information gathered from people who were following a carnivore diet or people who were following an omnivorous diet. We understand humans cannot subsist solely on carbohydrates. There are two essential macronutrients. There are a host of micronutrients we also require. The plant kingdom does not contain all of the nutrition humans require, but the animal kingdom does. Based on anecdotes, which we rely on for both extremes, especially because the science does not and cannot exist on causative outcomes, and neither group has been extensively tested for even associative outcomes. This is best expressed in humans when following a heavily animal-based diet with little to no dietary carbohydrate. In short, with vegan diets, there's a scramble to make sure that people supplement in order to get the whole of nutrition they require. And indeed, this is a major topic among people who actually follow the vegan diet. However, with a carnivore diet, we expect to see people needing more fiber in their diet or more vitamin C. For people who actually follow a carnivore diet, we mostly see people needing to be careful about their mineral balance. There do not appear to be reports of their struggles in life due to lack of fiber or an inability to absorb vitamin C. I don't say all this to try to encourage people to be carnivore, eat however you like. It is more to point out that 1, we should be focused more on nutrition if we want to truly support well-being amongst each other. 2, we should also be sure there are no double standards when many things that apply to a vegan diet can also apply to a carnivore diet. And 3, that we understand that nutrition science isn't perfect, but that we can figure out results for ourselves as individuals by being open to try things we may have previously been afraid to try because of misinformation.
With current yields, that means we need much more habitable land to produce food. This would destroy vast areas of nature and with it biodiversity, capacity to store carbon, and many other benefits. And land use is, unfortunately, not the only problem. Food production also requires fresh water, causes environmental pollution due to overuse of fertilizer, and contributes to climate change. Estimates vary, but greenhouse gas emissions coming from the food system account for about 1/4 to 1/3 of total emissions. And without changing the food system, it would likely be impossible to avoid 1.5 or 2 degrees of warming. At the same time, climate change also affects food production. Apart from the environmental issues, there is the aspect of human health. Many people currently don't have access to enough or diverse sources of food, causing stunting and wasting. About 30% of people are moderately or severely food insecure.
Can we just talk about what's on the plate? It looks like beans and rice. I don't consider these things food. I understand that they can be used to keep humans alive, the same as gruel can, but I also understand that I'm not looking at nutrition. And so if I see something and I don't see human nutrition, I cannot consider it as food. The fact that we're looking at rice and beans is very telling. I want you to picture something. Take a similar weight in a piece of fatty red meat, put it on a plate, compare it to the rice and beans, and ask yourself which of those plates you would rather have if you were starving to death. We've already established that I understand that there are people in areas of the world who don't have access to real food. The point I'm making is that we should be striving to provide them with real food.
On the other side of the spectrum, there's a large group that's eating too many calories, causing overweight, obesity, and diseases of affluence. Around 40% of all adults are either overweight or obese.
I wonder if it's not only because we have this abundance of so-called calories, but also a marked decrease in food quality and our ideas about what passes as food. I'm noticing a startling absence of donuts, Doritos, Mountain Dew, and other garbage that people happily poison themselves with on a daily basis. If we want to plant the idea in people's minds that a balanced whole foods, plant-based diet is good for us, why show those exact foods in the tube? The fact of the matter is, for the average person, the amount of meat and fat that would fill that tube is nowhere near the amount of plant material that would be filling the tube when we're simply trying to make sure people's nutritional needs are being met. But here's why I'm so disrespectful when it comes to including calories in this conversation. You can fill your caloric needs with potatoes and you would die in short order. You could fill it completely with junk food. You would last longer, which is scary, but it's the realistic expectation, judging from the fact that the standard American diet gives people decades. More so than calories, it's important to consider nutrition. I simply can't stress it enough.
All of this paints a pretty grim picture, but fortunately, there are solutions. First, we can improve yields. Historically, we were able to grow from 3 billion people in 1960 to almost 8 billion in 2020, with now more food available per person than in the 1960s, all while keeping the amount of cropland used relatively steady. That means we were able to produce more food on the same area of land.
Is this a reason why our topsoil is so depleted right now?
This picture does hide big regional differences, with arable land expansion in many low-income countries and a decrease in high-income countries. So, can we continue with this trend? Fortunately, there is still room for yield improvement in many places of the world, notably in sub-Saharan Africa. This means agricultural expansion can at least be limited by improving yields.
Going into this video, I assumed we were going to be aiming towards sustainable solutions or even practical solutions. You may have this pleasant idea about cereal in your mind. You already know nobody's talking about Frosted Flakes and Fruit Loops. They're talking more about something like oatmeal, things like that. I want you to imagine there's food scarcity where you are. People in the first world over coffee at Starbucks are sitting deciding what kind of food is best to be providing people in low-income areas of the world with. Surely, and in the short term, you'd be happy to receive almost anything, but as a long-term solution, they just want to keep feeding you cereal. Again, I'd like to remind you of the plate we saw earlier. Think of a comparable amount of oatmeal on one plate and meat with the associated fat on the other. Which would your starving ape brain see as food in a situation like that? Which do you think you would prefer? Which do you think scientifically would best meet your needs as a human being on planet Earth? Which, therefore, do you think we should be striving to provide people with as a more permanent solution to food scarcity?
The second important element is what kind of food we eat. The environmental impact of food differs depending on the type of food that's produced. In general, animal products have much larger environmental impacts, including land requirements compared to plants.
Let's say we take this seriously. There are a few key things I notice here. The top 3 plant foods are completely extraneous in the human diet. Getting rid of all those 3 things together seems like it would do us a lot of good because they're also incredibly toxic to humans. Now, next is the biggest contribution. It appears to come from ruminant animals. What immediately comes to mind is that these animals are actually part of the carbon cycle. So if we were treating these animals responsibly, it should stand to reason that they would have a positive impact on the environment. Much larger animals and in much larger numbers used to exist on the planet, and yet we didn't have a problem like this. So if we're having a problem now, it should stand to reason that it's with the process through which we are raising these animals. There are lots of reports as well that mention consumption of red meat is down overall and consumption of poultry is more than it used to be, yet pig and poultry are both beneath dark chocolate and coffee. My contention is the bigger the animal, the more people can be fed based on the death of one animal. So it's in our best interest to raise and slaughter animals that are larger and that provide people with a more complete spectrum of nutrition. The more of these animals that are raised responsibly, the better off those animals will be, the better off the environment will be, and the better off humans will be for having access to better nutrition. The way we treat animals, the process through which we farm them, is entirely within our control. The final point I want to make is none of the foods that are listed on the screen that are blue provide a complete nutritional profile for people. Yet we're wasting a lot of land growing them. Because they're not necessarily part of the carbon cycle, they don't typically give back what they take. Foods these days may be less nutritious because of that. The script mentioned before, in order to grow crops, we have to use things like fertilizers. Pesticides are also responsible for environmental issues, but in order to grow these monocrops, in order to feed people around the world, we need pest control. We simply cannot do it without them. And if the fertilizers are chemical fertilizers, all the more reason to be wary of growing such foods.
Because of the amount of land necessary to produce animal products, livestock production currently uses 77% of agricultural land. But these products only supply 18% of global calories. Conversely, 82% of calories come directly from plants, while only taking up 23% of agricultural land.
Please, whatever you do, focus on the calories and not on the nutrition.
Most of the land used for livestock is grassland for cows and other ruminants. But crops such as cereals and soy are also grown specifically to feed animals. In high-income countries, most of the produced cereals are fed to animals. This process is inefficient because animals only convert a portion of their feed into meat, dairy, or eggs. Low-income countries can't afford this inefficiency and use most of their cereals for direct human consumption. Ideally, you would want to grow crops for direct human consumption and feed animals things like leftovers that are not suitable for human consumption, or grass where grassland is the desired ecosystem. This more circular food system would result in a large reduction of animal products in the diet, especially in high-income countries where high consumption of animal products is often the norm.
The 2 biggest crops that are grown in the U.S. are, the U.S. just for example, soy and corn. Soy and corn have found their way into places where they've never been before, basically in places where they do not belong. If you go to the supermarket and look at the ingredient list of foods that you wouldn't expect to see them in, chances are you will see one of them. Not only do we consume the product as it is, for example, corn on the cob, we also process them into other materials such as tofu and oils. After that, the waste is given to animals. For ruminant animals, especially cows, it's not their natural food. We can complain about the quality of meat, the sickness in cows, and how we treat them on account of that sickness, for example, but it's similar to why humans are so sick. Neither of us are being fed foods that are actually health promoting. I understand that they are being fed these things, but I take issue with the narrative that these crops are being grown specifically to feed them. I'm expected to believe that there are producers of these crops who are growing these crops primarily to feed to animals, despite the fact that the real profit is made when these crops are used in the ways mentioned previously. Perhaps there is some percentage of them that will give a whole pristine cob of corn to a cow to eat, but I don't buy that this is what the industry standard is. There's a very recent video that I was glad to have seen before I posted this one. It's quite short and it highlights the point perfectly. The link is in the description.
Switching to environmentally friendly diets like pescatarian, vegetarian, vegan, or low meat could result in huge benefits to the planet. A strategic reduction of animal products could free up large amounts of agricultural land. Giving this area back to nature would result in massive benefits for the planet.
Since when have ruminant animals doing their thing naturally on the planet not been part of nature? Yes, I agree. Allowing them to do what they've always done, the very thing that allowed us to have such nutritious topsoil in the first place, would be a very good idea. I'm failing to see how continuing to make room for more of these earth-destroying crops is giving back to nature. We haven't touched on this yet, but in order to prepare the land to grow crops, yes, even when we're growing them to feed humans, we have to till the soil. Tillage is a major issue as it tends to degrade soil. This is why I want to stress that we have to think about what our priorities are. I think it's very important that we prioritize health and happiness, and that should include physical and mental well-being among humans on the planet. In order to facilitate that, we ought to be providing people with nutrient-dense food more so than calorie-rich food. We ought to do the things that are beneficial for other animals as well. Allowing them to live a more natural life in which they are actually able to have access to real food, for example, should be preferable. Reducing the amount of monocrops we grow and reducing people's dependence on such earth-destroying crops should be a priority. By the way, this doesn't mean that no one eats plants. It doesn't mean that everyone should be forced to eat animals. It doesn't mean that we should not be making allowances for places that are still struggling to get nutrient-dense foods. With an issue as complicated as this one, flexibility is required. We should allow for people to make the ultimate decision about what they consume.
Restoring nature is also a great way to battle climate change. Aside from what we eat, it also matters how much we eat. In high-income countries, average caloric intake is usually very high. Reducing excess caloric intake would therefore not only help the planet, but improve human health as well.
You know what an even better way of improving human health is? Focusing on nutrition rather than calories.
Another important factor is food loss and waste. 24% of all calories produced are lost or wasted.
The writers of the script, the people behind the spinning of this narrative, whoever, absolutely obsessed with calories. I'm not worried about calories going to waste. I'm worried about nutrition going to waste.
In high-income countries, it's mainly from the plate. In low-income countries, it's mainly on the field and during transport and storage. And there are many other smaller issues that need to be addressed in the food system, such as the fact that some agricultural land is currently being used for the production of biofuels. When it comes to fixing the food system, there isn't a silver bullet. We need to combine many different solutions. But the most important step is moving towards food that is high yield, low impact.
I'm pretty sure that's cows.
In some regions, such as sub-Saharan Africa, the primary goal should be to increase food production on the same area by increasing yields.
I'd like to play a game. Do you want to play a game? It's called Spot the Human Nutrition. What's that you say? This game is rigged? There's none to be seen on the screen? Touché.
In other regions, such as Europe and North America, the primary goal should be to switch to more plant-based diets and more environmentally friendly ways of producing, and perhaps even use some of the current agricultural land for rewilding. So far, we've only looked at what's possible today. But innovations could also reshape the food landscape. When it comes to how we grow food, precision agriculture and innovations in aquaculture could further reduce the environmental impact of our food system. And when it comes to replacing animal-sourced foods, precision fermentation and cultured meat are two potential solutions that could make a transition easier.
So in the end, we want to move towards unproven methods, expensive and time-consuming methods, energy-intensive methods. We want to ignore time-tested methods, and still, at the end of all of it, we should still not be eating natural foods, but veritable frankenfood when it comes to the real source of nutrition in the human diet. We can't even keep that one precious source of nutrition natural.
Without action, the future looks grim. But with the right mindset and solutions, we can move towards a healthier planet that also supports a healthier population.
I finished watching this video almost speechless. A person may be wondering why I'm so desperate to have there be animals involved in this process. I just have this crazy feeling, and I can't be sure where it could have possibly come from, but I just have this crazy feeling that somehow it's because that's how it's supposed to be. Humans love to quote unquote play God. They love to go places and change the natural ecosystems and then sit there shrugging when things go to shit. We love to manufacture food and then sit there shrugging when everybody's health goes to shit. We love to take animals and toy with them and then sit around wondering why our food quality is shit. We look down on people who live natural lives. We try to control them and tell them how they should be living their life. We engage in practices that destroy their way of life. Meanwhile, they're the ones who are contributing least to climate change. And then we sit there shrugging. What's that? We don't just sit around. We don't shrug. Yeah, you're right. We don't. We do everything in our power to make things worse. And it's typically on account of people making a lot of money. I should hope that a person should not need to be told that grains, cereals are not fit to sustain a high standard of human life. Cereals and grains are probably the reason why you feel so terrible every day. Comparing plants and animal products again, barring human intervention, animals are perfectly capable of sustaining human life as they are. When we step in and we feed them things we're not supposed to be feeding them, and we breed them in weird ways and we inject them with hormones, that's when we start having poor quality meat. One could argue that we have to fortify our meat now too, but let's be clear about why. Why do we fortify cereals and grains? They're inedible in their natural form. To make them edible, they undergo processing. Along the way, they are typically stripped of whatever nutrition they may have had naturally. Say a human chooses to chew their way through one of these crops and doesn't die. This human would have a hard time accessing the nutrients on account of the crop being indigestible. After processing, what's left over is usually some kind of material that is completely useless, but edible enough that it won't kill what eats it right away. If you do something with it, like make a batter and bake it. So in order to make it not entirely useless, nutrition is added back to it. From start to finish, the crop itself is basically useless. But as mentioned in the script, it can keep people alive because it does give them something to power their bodies with. Contrary to popular belief, these products are not necessarily good for people. They still contain compounds that will attack the host when consumed. So basically, we go out of our way to destroy the environment in order to grow them. And then we eat them and we're sicker for it. We feed them to animals and they're sicker for it. And at the end of the day, we may have filled a caloric need, but we don't even have the full spectrum of nutrition required to sustain human life. If I were to argue that cereals make some companies around the world a lot of money, and so do seed oils, I can imagine some people saying that the same is true for animal agriculture. Without me having to spell it out for you, can you come to your own conclusion about the major difference between the consumption of animal products and the consumption of cereals and grains? If we were to do anything, it should be to protect the means of growing food that are actually part of how nature had come to preserve itself. We ought to be providing solid sources of nutrition to people and stop focusing so much on calories wherever possible. We can leave room for people who would prefer to have a varied diet and for people who would prefer to have a more extreme diet. One of the most important things we should do is educate people. Industries will have the power that they have. They will continue to spin whatever narrative they want in order to protect their financial interests. We get caught up when we follow along with them because of preconceived notions, because of what has become quote unquote common sense regarding our ideas of nutrition. We don't take the intellectually responsible step of double checking, of verifying, of testing to be sure. It becomes blind trust, and next thing you know, we have generations of people who are brought up on food pyramids struggling with obesity, heart disease, and diabetes. People who've, over time, decreased their red meat, fat, and cholesterol consumption, who have taken steps to lower their cholesterol, and who are struggling with issues like dementia. Generations of people who are so addicted to sugar that they will immediately dismiss any notion that a human could possibly subsist on planet Earth without dietary carbohydrates. If science is important to you, if you're expecting me to produce some kind of paper or some kind of research, yet you're unaware that there's no requirement for carbohydrates in the human diet, unaware that carbohydrates are not essential in the human diet, maybe you think I have an agenda. But based on the things I mentioned here in the conclusion, what exactly is the path I'm trying to lead you down? How would you sum up for yourself what it is exactly that I'm asking anyone who may be watching this video? We are responsible for our own health and happiness. If it is something we truly seek, objective facts of reality and realistic expectations of our actions should be the foundation for how we go about achieving these things. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, be having a good day.